Hello and welcome back to Stories with Andrew. You'll remember that when we met last time, I was retelling a story written by David Kossoff about the beginning of everything, how God had started with nothing and out of it created a beautiful world, and that he then was a bit lonely and decided that he needed to make a companion for himself. And so we press on with the story from God having looked around and seen what a beautiful creation he'd made to introducing the first person. And I guess, as we'll find out, that's just where things began to go a bit wrong. So here's the story about Adam and Eve and their family. Now, when God decided to make a man to live in this brand new world that he'd created, he hadn't thought much about it other than that he would use himself as the plan, the model, and do all the work with his own hands. All the animals, the plants, the birds, the fishes, he just sort of imagined and said, let them be, and there they were. But the man, this was the most exciting project. He wanted to make this. It was a special job. So he looked around for suitable material. Not because he knew what we were all going to turn out like, but he decided to use mud because mud was good for modelling. We don't know what colour the mud was. It may have been dark brown or black or even yellow. We really don't know. But God worked quietly and happily until he'd made a fairly good likeness, and then he let it dry. It, not he, it, a statue, lying down, made of mud, wet dust. And then God bent over and blew, just gently, into the nostrils of the statue, and it changed and became skin and bone and hair, and its chest moved and its eyes blinked, and it got unsteadily to its feet, and they looked at each other. God was pleased with his work. Your name is Adam, he said, and you will live in a garden where the trees and plants are not only beautiful, but will give you everything you need for food. We'll go there now. God had chosen the site for the first man's house with great care, a place he called Eden, well watered and very mild, and it really was beautiful. He showed Adam round rather proudly. You'll be in charge, he told him, to look after everything, to grow things for yourself. Keep things tidy, because I'm very fond of this place. I often come here and walk in the evenings. I hope you'll be very happy. He turned to walk away and then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. There are 2 trees in the garden that you mustn't touch in any way. Fruit trees, right there in the middle of the garden. And then God left and Adam settled in, a sort of gardener. He had no one to learn from, but God had forgotten nothing. All the skills that Adam needed were given to him, and his hands were just shown how. God visited often, and one day told Adam he had a special job for him. Before I made you, said God, I made all the animals and the birds and so on. Well, none of them have any names. So I've arranged that every animal and bird will visit the garden in turn, and you, Adam, can decide what to call them. Also, this is really important, look among them for a helper, a companion for yourself. Sometimes I've seen you looking a bit lonely, and we don't want that, do we? So Adam did all that God said, but although he admired many of the creatures, there was not one that he felt he could make a real friend of. Oh, he was drawn to some animals, ones that he called dog and cat and horse, but only to a limited extent were they company for him. So he explained to God. So God put Adam into a deep sleep, and whilst he was under anaesthetic, did a little surgery on him. He removed a rib and healed the wound, and from the rib made a new sort of creature, not an animal, not a bird, in fact, looking very much like Adam, but with a few differences. That should do it, said God. Then he woke Adam and showed it to him. Adam was astonished. It's called a woman, said God. I named it myself, a companion for you. You are male, she is female. All I told you about the garden you can get on and tell her. Well, Adam was very pleased to have someone to talk to at last. I think I'll call you Eve, he said. And the first thing about the garden that you must know is that you must not touch those trees in the middle, those 2 fruit trees. You can touch anything else, but not those. Well, time passed quickly. Adam and Eve enjoyed each other's company, and they had a very simple, primitive innocence that indeed was God-given. They lived in the sun, quite naked, and knew nothing of clothes anyway, like babies on a beach, and neither touched the 2 trees. But when God had made all the animals, he also gave them different levels of intelligence or cunning or craftiness, some more, some less. One of the creatures who seemed to get a double share of cunning and craftiness was the serpent. More subtle, says the Bible, than any other creature. A serpent lived in the garden. Well, many animals did. And it used to watch Eve as she curiously would look up into the 2 forbidden trees. That fruit is delicious, it said to her one day. Delicious. A rare experience. Why don't you try it? Eve looked at the serpent. If we eat or even touch it, she said, we'll die. Nonsense, said the serpent. The tree is magic, and if you eat some of the fruit, not only will you not die, but you'll be much wiser in every way. He had a smooth tongue, all right, that serpent. And eventually Eve picked some of the fruit and talked Adam into eating some too. And then they sat around waiting to be wiser. Poor Adam and Eve. The wisdom in the tree was the knowledge of right and wrong. So right away they knew that their new wisdom they had done wrong, and they were ashamed. With their new wisdom they looked at each other and were no longer like innocent primitives, no longer babies on the beach. They saw themselves guilty and naked, and hid their bodies from each other with garments that they stitched together out of leaves. And they hid themselves in front of God when he walked in the garden. But God knew what had happened. Where are you, Adam? He said. Why are you hiding from me? Adam came out from behind a bush. Well, he said, I heard you were about and I wasn't dressed. Why, said God, are you wearing those leaves? Well, said Adam, you can't go around naked. It's just not right. How, said God, do you know you were naked, or what naked means, or what's right or wrong? Well, then it started. Adam blamed Eve and she blamed the serpent, and God listened. So soon disobedience. So soon the need to punish. You will leave the garden, he told them, and never come back. Because of your disobedience, life will be harder for all who come after you. For women, childbirth will have pain, and men will have to work, to toil and to sweat. Paradise like this garden will have to be earned. It will no longer be freely given. And all will return to the material which I used to make you. Dust, dust to dust. That's how it will be. God was not angry. He was sad. It had begun to go wrong, and there was worse to come. In fact, we'll see a whole Bible full. So when God threw Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, it was not only because they'd disobeyed him and eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God was afraid that if he let them stay, they'd also eat from the tree of life and live forever. And he didn't want that. In fact, after the business with the serpent, he wished he'd never made them at all. But God is merciful, and he doesn't hold things against people. So he didn't, as it were, write them off. He found them somewhere else to live, showed them how to use skins instead of leaves for clothes. And then God had the idea that maybe a new pair of people would be an improvement. So he remembered how he'd given the plants and animals and birds and fishes their own seeds so they could multiply, even insects. It seems to work all right with the birds and the bees, thought God. I'll arrange something similar for Adam and Eve. And it worked well for them too. They had sons, Cain and Abel. Different types they were, as brothers often are, like chalk and cheese. When they were old enough, Cain worked the land with his father, and Abel was a shepherd. Rather quiet person, gentle, thoughtful. But Cain was none of these things. He was quick-tempered and violent and jealous and quarrelsome and had an evil streak. And Adam often had to act as peacemaker between his two sons. Adam remembered well his fall from grace and the beautiful garden, and he had good reason to be grateful for God's mercy, and he brought his sons up to fear God and to show respect. So at certain times of the year, they arranged for sacrifices to be offered. Abel loved these simple ceremonies, but Cain less so. God observed Cain's attitude on a number of these occasions and did nothing. But then one day, he both rejected Cain's offer and told him off. Cain burned. He watched his brother's sacrifice being accepted and saw Abel's simple happiness. And when Abel went back to his flock, Cain followed him. And in a lonely, hidden out of sight kind of way, Abel killed his brother. Then he went away from that place back to his own field. His anger died away. Then fear crept in. The wind died away too, and the trees grew quiet, and everything grew quiet. No birds even were singing. And God spoke. Cain, where's Abel, your brother? Cain was sweating. He blustered out, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? God didn't waste too many words. Cain's punishment was terrible. He was made a wanderer, a fugitive. He had no place to go and no God to turn to. He felt the face of God and the hand of every man turned against him. But God made him live long and marked him so that men would know that though he had killed his brother, they must not kill him in return. All life was to be sacred, and that even meant Cain's. How quickly things were starting to go very wrong.